Hello and welcome to another edition of Coffee Talk with immigration attorney Brian D. Lerner. Um, Before I get into this particular video, I want to wish everyone a happy holidays, happy New Year, whatever it is you celebrate. I hope that you have a joyous end of the year celebration with your family and a prosperous new year coming up. Um, I'd like to talk in my string of videos on immigration reform. I'd like to talk a little bit about the parole which have been put into the executive order from President Obama. It often gets overlooked and doesn't seem to have as much emphasis as other parts, but in actuality, if you don't qualify for the DAPA, DACA, and even if you do, this still comes into play. It is good to know that these things exist. Actually, all of these types of paroles existed before the executive action, but the policies have been made more clear, and the explanations of the breadth of the particular policies have been expanded. So first, let me just start with what is the definition of these items dealing with parole. So there's three different versions of parole that you should be aware of. There's parole, advanced parole, and parole in place, or PIP. That's the shorthand for it. What do these mean? Well, parole basically means that you're outside the United States, and for whatever reason, which we'll get into in a little bit, but for whatever reason, immigration allows you to come into the United States, but you don't have a visa, you don't have any other authorization, you are essentially paroled into the United States, or you are allowed for whatever reason to come into the United States minus authorization, minus inadmissibility, whatever it happens to be. So that's what parole is. Now, what's advanced parole? Well, advanced parole is now, let's say you are inside the United States and you know you're going to be leaving. Okay, let's say that you know that your parent is very sick and you need to see your mom or dad or whatever it is, and you know you're going to be leaving, but in order to get back to the United States, again, for reasons we'll discuss in a little bit, you must have authorization to do it. So before you leave the U.S. to go to Mexico or Canada or wherever you're going, you apply and get advance parole. It's exactly what it says. You're actually going to need it. You're applying for it. So you get advance parole. Assuming it's all approved, you will get the advance parole with a date of when it is valid until, and then when you leave, realistically, instead of showing your passport, you show the advance parole. Sometimes that's referred to as the white passport, and then you're allowed back in the U.S. And then there is parole in place. What's that? Well, under certain circumstances, which again, I don't mean to keep putting it off here, but I just want to give you the general definitions first. Under certain circumstances, you happen to be in the U.S., okay, and you're not going to go outside the U.S., you're not going to leave in the future, you're just going to stay in the U.S., but under certain circumstances, you can apply for parole in place, which that again is exactly what it means. It's sort of a legal fiction that if that's approved, then basically it is as though the immigration paroled you or allowed you to come into the United States under this particular provision. So essentially, you can stay right where you are without ever having to leave the U.S., without anticipating going outside the U.S., and you get the authorization for parole where you are at the current time, parole in place. So those are the three items. Now, what are the differences made through the Obama executive action to these items? And keeping in mind they exist as we speak right now, but what changes are there going to be? Well, the is extending a bit, which is generally before this. What the parole in place was is, let's say there are, the military is here, and what happens is under certain circumstances, the military and certain relatives will be able to apply for parole in place because of being in the military. Um, and so they give extra care and better benefits basically to be able to be paroled in place if there is a military person involved. Well, they've expected that or expanded that a bit to now they're actually going to protect unauthorized families of U.S. military and those seeking to enlist. Okay. Before you couldn't for sure do it if you wanted to enlist, but now if you want to go into the military and otherwise qualify, you can apply for parole in place to essentially get authorization to be here legally. And so what will happen is the new guidance expands the availability of the parole in place to family members of U.S. citizens and lawful permanent residents who seek to enlist in the U.S. Armed Forces. So if you happen to be in that particular category, you definitely want to be able to use this, because the reality is if you use the parole in place to enlist and it gets approved and you enlist and you serve in a time of war, you might be able to jump directly to a special form of naturalization to become a U.S. citizen. So, it's really more far reaching than just expanding the parole in place. And then the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security also asked USCIS to consider granting deferred action to family members of current military personnel and veterans who have overstayed their visas. So, this might apply to people who served 20 years ago, and they might have families here that are here illegally, and then it can apply as far as that goes as well. Okay, so that basically is a summation of the parole in place. Now, what about the advance parole policy? Well, let me tell you how this works. There was an issue, and there still is an issue prior to the Obama executive action, that, let's say, for example, somebody wants to adjust status. I'll give you the clear example. Let's say marry U.S. citizen, everything's bona fide, real marriage, and there's no other grounds of inadmissibility other than the fact that they basically entered illegally, okay? And so they can't adjust in the U.S. So the thinking was, okay, get them advanced parole under whatever policy you can get an advanced parole, then have them leave the U.S. and then enter on the advanced parole, and then they can say they have a legal entry in order to be eligible to adjust status. The problem is that it was risky to do that, because the moment that you left the U.S., they might say, oh, well, now you're subject to the 3 to 10 year bar regardless of the advanced parole, and we're not going to let you back in until you apply and get approved the 3 to 10 year bar. Well, obviously nobody wanted to leave under those circumstances, because who's going to chance that the particular officer will allow them to come in on an advanced parole? And so realistically, you could come in door one, it wouldn't be any problem, and then come in a day later on door two, and they'll say, no, you don't qualify. So the policy was all over the board on this particular issue. So essentially, there was a decision that was issued in 2012, a matter of Arabali, which basically found that for someone who leaves under advance parole, it does not trigger the 3 to 10 year bar that ordinarily applies when you depart the U.S. And then they can come back in the U.S. and boom, after that they're eligible to adjust status. So what this memo from the Secretary of the Homeland Security says is that now all of DHS officials are to follow matter of Arabali in this particular case, so there will not be, different adjudications across the board. And this is very good for people who might not qualify to adjust. So, if you come to my office, I'll see if you qualify for DAPA or DACA. If you qualify for DAPA or DACA, then you can qualify to get advanced parole. If you get advanced parole, you go out, you leave, under matter of arabelli, you then have a legal entry, not subject to the 3 to 10 year bar, and then you can file for adjustment of status. So that's a very good development, and hopefully it will actually be consistently applied. I still have fear that some officers may not apply it, even though, there's a memo from the top boss of the organization. Okay, and then there's finally parole for people who are outside the United States, who, for example, I'll give you an example. Let's say you're from India, you have a master's degree, and you apply for a perm, okay, for the green card. Because there's so many people in that country applying, you're going to be waiting more than 10 years for the visa number to become current. And this is just one example, but the memo be parole for investors, researchers, and founders of startup enterprises, which essentially is great for entrepreneurs, for business people. Essentially, USCIS has been directed to draft regulations for a new category of parole to enable certain inventors, researchers, founders of startup businesses to enter the U.S. before they become eligible for a visa. So this is great. They're not going to have to wait, the months or years or whatever it normally takes in which to come here to get their ideas off the ground, to start their business and so forth. The parole would allow these individuals to temporarily pursue their research and development of their promising ideas and businesses in the U.S. rather than abroad. So, that's all that I have on that one. There's not any regulations that have been issued yet, but there has been talk, and there has been orders that USCIS is to draft the regulations. I'm not really sure when they're supposed to come, but this will definitely help those business people in the coming months to be able to get here a lot quicker to the U.S. Okay, if you like the video, click like, subscribe. You can call my office, set up for a free consultation, and then we'll see what we can do to help you. Okay, more on the coming videos.